right, welcome to a special edition of Mississippi Stories. Really glad to have our guest on today because, as you might have heard, we are in the middle of another wave in the coronavirus with the Delta variant, which actually wave may not be the right term, tsunami might be a right term, and it's putting incredible stress on our medical system. So I felt like that you needed to hear from an expert to put a human face on knowing what's going on around us a little bit. And that expert is here with us today is Dr. Daniel Edney. He's joined the Mississippi State Department of Health, it was March of this year, which seems like 47 years ago, considering how this year has gone so far.
Right.
But your role is Chief Medical Officer and Regional Health Officer in the Central Public Health Region. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Excellent. Very good. 30 years you've been in Vicksburg. You're from Greenville originally, right?
That's right.
Well,
I'm a Delta boy.
Yeah, so you couldn't totally get out of the Delta, so you went down to Vicksburg to hang out for 30 years, which is kind of...
Went to the very bottom of the Delta.
Exactly.
Been hanging out for 30 years and loving it.
Well, and we'll talk about a little bit some of the things that you've done, but I mean, in that 30 years, obviously you've never saw a health challenge like what we're being faced with this week.
Not at all. Nothing even close. The H1N1 flu doesn't hold any comparison. You know, the true SARS outbreak that we were so worried about, and even Ebola, nothing comes close. And unfortunately, we haven't seen the worst of it.
You say that basically, and I was looking at the numbers. So we're recording this a few days prior to when it's airing. So we're recording this on a Tuesday. It was, I think, 3,488 cases today, and it was 6,900 over the weekend. And literally just 2 to 3 weeks ago, it was like a couple hundred. This thing is that contagious, isn't it?
It is. We were almost out of it. We were hoping we would be able to get our vaccination rate up in time before we were hit with something like this. But if you go back and listen to Dr. Dobbs and Dr. Byers' reports to the public, you know, they've been sounding the alarm for a month as we were seeing this come our way. And now it is here. And just by looking at the numbers, what really got our attention is when we saw, it's called the R0 value, which is the level of infectiousness. And it had gone from one person infecting 2 to 3 to one person infecting 8 or 9. So that's the level of chickenpox.
Yeah.
And that's why it has blown up on us. And if you're looking at the curves that we're reporting out to the public, it's really not a curve. It's almost a straight line up. Whereas the other waves were truly, you know, ramp up for a while, then ramp down. This one is just going straight up.
You know, when this hit India, and of course, this is where this variant is apparently originated from, I remember watching on the news how they literally were having to cremate people in the streets and so forth because their level of vaccination was nearly nil at that point. But I was thinking, this isn't your father's version of variant of COVID. There's something that's different about that. And when you say chickenpox, people may not remember chickenpox per se. I remember as a kid, I was in second grade and I'd had it in kindergarten. And I came in one day to class and like 3/4 of the class was gone the next day. That's how infectious it was. So we're talking about something that hit India like crazy. It hit England and now it's hitting us. Is this, and you say the worst is yet to come?
It is, just because, you know, the rate of rise that we're seeing from day to day, and now we're seeing deaths start to follow, which we knew that was going to happen as well. And there's this myth going around that the survival rate is 99.9% when the mortality rate is 2.2%, Marshall. So if we report out 3,400 cases, then 2.2% of those will be dead in 2 weeks. These are real people. And they don't need to be dying of COVID.
No.
And right now they're younger. You know, the number one age group dying right now is 50 to 64-year-olds.
Yeah, and on top of that, I've you know, this is all anecdotally, but I mean, you know, I have friends that are doctors and they talk to their other friends who are doctors and they're saying, yeah, there's like 20-year-olds that are on ventilators, there's 30-year-olds on ventilators. And, you know, I think everybody's kind of has in their mindset thinking about the COVID that hit last year where kids weren't affected, where young people weren't really that affected. This is a totally different animal, isn't it?
It is. And it's of our making, because the way viruses mutate like this is by transmitting over and over in a population. And COVID has just had free reign. There's been nothing to hold it back, certainly in Mississippi, and our level of immunity being so low, it just continues to transmit until it figures out how to defeat us. And the Delta variant has done that very nicely. Thankfully, even though it's defeating previous COVID immunity, so if you had COVID 6 months ago, it's really almost as if you have not had COVID against Delta. But the vaccinations are holding very nicely, actually much better than we thought. So, we still have a chance to get through this. We don't know what's going to happen to the hospital system. Everybody is preparing for worst case scenarios that we truly never thought we would have to look at. We've always prepared for them, but we never really in our gut thought we'd ever have to implement them. But today, Dr. Dobbs called for federal assistance in terms of staffing intensive care unit beds at University Medical Center, because we have no ICU beds. And so we have federal assistance coming so we can open up more ICU beds, and we're going to need more than that.
I mean, and I think that's something a lot of people don't understand. They understand, well, there's beds and so forth, but there's not people as well. I mean, right. It's kind of like when you go into a restaurant and they don't have the server. You look and you see all these empty tables everywhere, but you're not getting seated. It's because there's right. no wait staff, there's no chef, there's no anything like that. And I mean, I was in the hospital for an elective procedure back in March, right? So I had back surgery, right? Yeah. And I talked to several of the nurses when I wasn't completely out on my drugs at those moments, because you tend to be that way, and they're all burned out. They were just exhausted. Yeah. They were like, we have been going and going and going. So you kind of have a combination of just not a lot of beds, but also too, you just have really tired and exhausted medical staffs right now too, don't you?
Absolutely. I know in Vicksburg, we have no ICU beds. If you go into the emergency department, there's always 3 to 4 people on stretchers because there's no rooms. And then there's always 3 people on the ventilator in the emergency department, because those are our overflow ICU beds. But we have, if we had the staff, we could open up 8 more beds right now in Vicksburg. But you can't just put people in the bed without professional staff to run the ventilators. So we have plenty of ventilators, we have beds, but we don't have nurses and respiratory therapists and the clinical staff to staff up these ICU beds. A lot of them have been enticed out of state to other hot zones that are paying a whole lot more than Mississippi can afford. And so we've lost a lot of nurses and support staff to Texas and Florida. And our nurses that have stood tall are exhausted. And here they are looking at probably another 4 to 6 weeks of really severe stress on the hospitals ahead of us.
I post a lot of things about this, whether it's my cartoons or where I'm doing posts, and just trying to plead with people to get the vaccination, because I think it would be very safe to say that this is right now it is because it's hitting the unvaccinated primarily, correct?
It is.
Yeah,
correct.
And so, but I still get back the stuff from last year. I still get back the 99.7%, and it's a hoax and it's fake. But now I'm starting to see more and more people that are like, pray for my uncle or pray for my mom right. or pray for my sister. And that's starting a little bit, what can we do as people, just as, just more everyday people to help fight this? Because I think there's a personal responsibility part of this as well, isn't there?
Absolutely. It's, right now, you can't go to the emergency department. You need to go to the emergency department. You need to have a life-threatening situation, because there's nowhere to go. It's a 12-hour wait to get in, and then to be evaluated after that. We're having heart attacks, having to bypass hospitals that shouldn't be bypassing hospitals. So in terms of taking care of your local hospital, number one, get vaccinated. Mm-hmm. That's number one. Number two is, behave responsibly. And, I don't live in fear, but I sure respect this thing, because I've seen what it can and what it does do. I've seen it right at the bedside. I have lost people that I love deeply to this thing. I wear a mask. I wash my hands. I socially distance as best I can. I don't go into high risk situations. Man, I had to waste my ZZ Top tickets 2 weeks ago because I just, Delta was flaring up. Even in the Brandon Amphitheater, it was an unacceptable risk, at that point. But I live my life.
Yeah.
But I do it, I do the reasonable thing. So we're not telling people to lock down. I am telling my folks that are 80 years old, okay, it's time to batten down the hatches for a couple of weeks, not 3 months, but it's just not worth the risk. Just settle in and let's get through this. But, if you're vaccinated and you're wearing your mask and you're behaving responsibly, you can still live life. But those who are acting as if nothing's going on, I just truly I can't comprehend where it's coming from. The only thing I can think of, Marshall, is that thus far it has not touched their family, but it's about to. If the families, I had one family this week that it just went right through their family. They all needed monoclonal antibody therapy. They were that sick, and these were otherwise young people, and we had to antibody treat them. It just went right through their family, and they have not seen what's going on in the hospitals.
Yeah, and you just touched on something there a little bit, because I always go back to Katrina and I think about how we pulled together and we helped each other and we ran down the coast with chainsaws and we brought food and we took care of everything. But this is so different because it's such a lonely way to die, and it's such a lonely disaster to where we, as the public, don't really see it. We might notice people disappearing off of Facebook, or we might notice our neighbor disappearing or so like that, but we don't get to see what you're seeing every single day when you're in the hospital on that. Tell us a little bit about what is happening to somebody when they end up having to go to, say, the ICU.
Well, if you're sick enough with COVID to go into the ICU, especially now, then it is a very serious case, and you've already been given every therapy that we have. And the only thing we can do is try to keep you alive long enough for your body to fight through this. Because, before you go in the ICU, you've been dosed with everything we have to dose.
Yeah.
And typically you're looking at, people living on the ventilator. Of course, we have to sedate them because it's a miserable existence, and typically they're going to be there 2 to 4 weeks, and they may survive. And at this stage of the pandemic, our ICU staff are experts. They know how to manage a COVID patient, where we really didn't a year ago. So they're keeping a lot more people alive longer, but we still need the body's immune system to get through it. And there's story after story of patients that are on the ventilator for a month and then succumb.
Yeah.
And then who are on the ventilator for a month and survive and make it out, but they're never the same. And that's the story that's not really being told, is those who survive COVID but are never the same. Their memory's not the same, the brain fog, the exhaustion, the scarred lungs, the weakened heart. This is a story that'll be coming out over the next couple of years as we see our disability rates going up. We call it long COVID, which y'all are hearing about, but it's a very real thing. It's a big enough thing that Vanderbilt and UMC both have long COVID clinics. That's all they take care of, are patients who have recovered from COVID, but still have serious health problems from it. And when we look at COVID recovered numbers, we don't count those. And we're not counting the kids that had MIS-C, that strange autoimmune phenomenon where they clot and have horrible inflammation, and they're otherwise healthy kids that just have this bizarre reaction to this virus. And these kids are devastated. So these are all things that will come out over the next few years that we in medicine know, and we see it and trying to fight it. But the public there's no way for them to be able to understand, what we see every day. So, being at the bedside of someone with COVID, really the scariest time is when they're declining and they're having more trouble breathing and their oxygen saturations are going down, and we're giving them BiPAP and every bit of oxygen we can give them, trying to keep them off the ventilator, and they know what's coming. And we hear over and over, why didn't I take the shot?
Wow.
Why didn't I take the shot? I can't believe I didn't take the shot. And of course, the families immediately go out and take the shot, but once you have COVID, it's too late. to take the shot for now. You can take it later when you recover, but the vaccine won't help you through an acute illness. So, and watching someone at the bedside, and of course, trying to protect yourself as you're ministering, to those with COVID, but just watching them decline is it's just a horrible thing to watch. It's one of the worst things in medicine I've ever had to do. I tell people my darkest day in medicine, this was back last April when it was first hitting the nursing homes. And my nursing home, which is a great nursing home, was doing everything exactly right. This was all pre-vaccination. It got in, this is regular COVID, got into our nursing home and just went through like wildfire. And the day that I had to, put on my respirator and all my PPE and round on 31 nursing home patients who were sick with COVID, that was my darkest day in medicine. It was just a surreal day. And I've done some weird stuff, with my disaster medicine and work in the developing world, but that was as hard a thing as I've had to do. And now, back then we were doing all we could. Now it's happening. And like Dr. Dobbs said, we have the tools, we're just not using them.
Yeah.
And that's what's so frustrating to those of us in healthcare is, look, God has given us what we need. It's the story, the old story of the guy that wouldn't evacuate for hurricane. The sheriff came to get him. He wouldn't leave. He said, God's going to take care of me. And then the water came up. He had to go to the second floor, and the Cajun Navy came to get him and try to evacuate him by boat. He said, no, God's got me. And the waters kept rising. He gets up on the roof and the helicopter comes to get him. And he says, no, I'm okay. God's got me. Next thing he knows, he's facing the pearly gates. And he says, God, I thought you had me. He said, I did. I sent the sheriff. I sent the boats. I sent a helicopter. What else you need? That's what he's done. He sent us the vaccine. This thing is incredibly safe and incredibly effective. We were hoping for maybe 50% efficacy. We were praying for that. We got 95%. We were hoping for less than 10% reaction rate. We're having less than 1% complications, way less than 1%. So this is like, just providential intervention in a pandemic right when we needed it. And for people not to take advantage of it, it's free, it's widely available. Anybody, if you're 12 and older, anybody can get it. And very soon it's going to be younger than that. It's just baffling to us. Thankfully, we have monoclonal antibody therapy, which is still effective against Delta. And we're preaching, if you get symptoms, you need to get tested especially if you're high risk, because if you're high risk, you need to get monoclonals. They can save your life. Very safe, very effective, and keep you out of the hospital. And so now we're pushing those out to every primary care clinic in the state to give it on the front lines and, try to keep people from getting so sick to go in the hospital. So we do have some great tools if we'll just use them.
What is high risk now with Delta? Because I knew what high risk was back, weight and age, and, you might have diabetes, you might have are those things obviously still were considered high risk, but it seems that Delta is just a little bit more likely to attack younger people. And what is high risk now?
So it's really the same, except if instead of worrying about 65 and older, we worry about 50 and older, because that's where the number of deaths, total deaths, are highest, 50 to 64. So if you're 55 years old and you have any health problem, you're going to get monoclonals, or it's going to be offered to you. If you're 50 and older and you've got a solid case of COVID, we're going to offer it to you.
Yeah.
Even if you're otherwise healthy, whereas 6 months ago we wouldn't. We said we'll be okay. We'll treat it and get through it. But now we've dropped the age from 65 really down to 50. And if you're 30 and really getting sick, we'll dose you at 30.
Yeah. Well, I know the viral load on Delta is a lot higher. Like, for instance, up in the nasal cavities, producing a lot more. That's why it's obviously more contagious and so forth. But it seems like it's just producing more virus than the old version of it.
It is 1,000 times more.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. But Dr. Byers this morning on our morning call showed the data of still the protection of the vaccine.
Yeah.
That for those of us and my risk, I'm 59. So in my risk category, I'm otherwise healthy, but I'm 59. We get 12-fold protection.
Wow, that's incredible.
12-fold, Marshall. That's huge.
So if we seriously, I know you're not going to get everybody getting the vaccine, but say if it were 70 or 80%, we would be talking about a wholly different situation right now in the hospitals and generally in the state as a whole. These numbers would be nowhere near this high, right?
So guess what? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Other parts of the country aren't going through this.
Yeah, New York, I saw, like I was listening to Daniel Griffin, who does on the virology podcast. I watch that because I'm a geek for that sort of thing. But he was watching, he's talking about, yeah, my hospitals, there's nobody in my hospital.
Yeah. You remember, this was really probably like 16 months ago when it really hit New York.
Yeah.
And we were just kind of watching it on television. And I mean, they had the morgue freezers outside the hospital.
Oh yeah, no,
really had the mass grave. So
yeah,
we were sitting there, just like, what in the world's going on? That's what they're doing with us. You know, folks in New York are looking down and saying, "Good grief," you know, and because we're now the red zone.
Yeah,
and other parts of the country with whose vaccination rates are up, and we do have areas of the country that are 80% vaccinated.
Yeah,
you know, that's why the national level is just over 50%. You know, the national fully vaccinated rate's just over 50%. You know, we've dosed over 300 million doses. This thing is not experimental anymore. We're not dealing with experimental vaccines anymore. We've dosed over 1 billion doses worldwide, and this has been studied more than any vaccine in the history of man, and it's still safe and effective. So, you know, it's just, you know, to watch it getting away from us, and that's what it's doing. It's getting away. But right now, we would say, you know, we have 35% who are fully vaccinated in the state, but we have probably another 20 to 30% who have immunity from natural immunity. It's not as good as vaccinated immunity. The best immunity is if you had COVID and then got vaccinated, that you had the best level of neutralizing antibodies and cell-mediated immunity. I'm jealous of those guys. But right now we're maybe 50, 60% level of immunity, but with Delta, we got to get up to 90. It's just because it's like the chicken pox. You know, old COVID, if we got to 70, 75, we'd have put the fire out.
Yeah.
We just didn't make it in time. And so now we got to push it even higher because the level of contagiousness is just so much higher.
Let me ask you about the breakthrough cases because, you're seeing it on the news, but you're also hearing it anecdotally through your friends and so forth. I've had several friends who've had the shot, who've had it. You know, they've got a very light case of it. And
exactly.
They get the sniffles and a sore throat, and then they don't have to go to the hospital. So, I mean, but then you got that high profile case with like Sheriff Vance, where he, unfortunately, something happened. I don't know what happened. I don't know his medical history on that. But for the most part, you're not seeing many vaccinated people in the hospitals, are you?
No, thank goodness. Yeah, Marshall, I care about you. I enjoy reading your cartoons, and I follow you. In fact, I'm COVID-free MD who stalks you on Twitter.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
But,
oh, wow. Okay.
But to be honest, I don't care if you get COVID sinusitis.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lose any sleep over that. I don't want you getting COVID pneumonia.
Right.
So your vaccine, you may get a mild case of sinusitis from COVID, but it should keep you from getting COVID pneumonia, and it should keep you out of the hospital and definitely keep you out of the morgue.
Yeah.
So we never said these things are 100% effective. I don't know of 100% effective.
No, I mean, the flu shot's never anywhere near.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, the flu shot is less than Johnson & Johnson, and we've been proud of it forever.
Yeah.
But, it's 95% effective until Delta came, which meant 95% certain it will keep you from getting it at all. And then if you get it, if you're in that 5% who gets it, then you're still more than 97% protected from severe illness.
You know, you hear a lot of the doozy conspiracy theories about the number one, that it hasn't been researched for long enough, which, if I'm correct, it's the platform itself had been researched for nearly a decade. And because they were able to get the genome type of this virus so quickly, they were able to literally plug it in. But isn't it kind of like sending a Post-it note to your immune system saying, here's your instructions on how to deal with this?
That's a great way to put it. It's going to be the future of viral immunizations. I'm convinced. In fact, we're already looking at it for flu vaccines to try to improve their effectiveness.
Yeah.
But, it's just ingenious. That we basically have a way to deliver the code to my white blood cells that make antibodies and who mount the response to fight viruses. All right, here's the code for COVID. If you see this, go after it. And, so when my white cells received the code, it started processing those antibodies. And that's why people, especially with their little second doses, have that more vigorous response, because your body thinks you're getting COVID, which is what we want, and it fights it. And so now if I get COVID, if I'm exposed to COVID, or if I actually get infected, my body will see it and will go after it, because I made sure we gave it the code it needed. All the other vaccines, it's like we'd give them part of the virus and, try to tease it to that's what we do with the flu shot, just give them parts of the virus to show our immune system, hey, this is what it looks like if you see it, go after it. But here we're actually giving it the secret code to defeat the thing. And I think it's ingenious and will be the future. And so, the FDA is frustrating us. The emergency use authorization is a big deal. It's rarely used. And when it's used, it's only after safety and efficacy have been demonstrated. So, the red tape's out of the way, the bureaucracy gets out of the way, and we're able to clinically do what we need to do as quickly as we can. The other reason it got to market so quickly, this was, and this is to Trump's credit, this is part of his legacy. That's why I call it the Trump shot. Okay. That those who are anti-government, who don't want it, the reason we got it so quickly is his administration approved not only research, but production at the same time, parallel. So just as soon as FDA had enough data to say, yes, it's safe and effective, it was already produced and we could roll it out. That saved us 8 months right there. So, and of course we wouldn't do that in normal times, but these aren't normal times. And the same thing's happening, with the boosters that are going to be needed down the road for all of us, probably the way things are looking, but these are not experimental vaccines anymore. I mean, how many doses do we need to give before somebody will say, well, I trust it now? Now, when we took it back in last December, it was experimental. I told patients, said, look, I'm going to be your guinea pig. I've watched the clinical data. I'm very impressed. I have no heartburn taking it. We're all going to take it. And by the time it's available for you, there will have been hundreds of thousands of healthcare workers vaccinated that you can see how we have done. And I told them then in January, February, it's not experimental. We took the experimental doses for you. Certainly 300 million doses in. I mean, good grief. If you're saying this is still experimental, just be honest. You don't want the shot. That's okay. But don't say it's still experimental. It's not.
I remember talking to my doctor, and he'd had it back, I think, in December. And, he was saying, oh, yeah, second shot was the one that got me and everything. But we had a big conversation. And frankly, if my doctor told me, and because he literally saved my life from my melanoma. And if he said, oh, yeah, you need to go walk across that, big field of coals, I would do it, because on that. But don't you think, I was just trying to think, how do we get past the vaccine hesitancy? And I think probably the number one way is for people's relationship with their doctor,
exactly.
if they have a doctor. And that, of course, in Mississippi is always a challenge because a lot of folks just go to the emergency room. So,
and that's it. And that's what our surveys looking at vaccine hesitancy have shown us, is that the number one trusted source of information is personal physician. But we have too many people that don't have that relationship. And that's why, those of us in public health, like Dr. Dobbs and Dr. Byers and myself have been trying to speak, especially with me, because I'm still a clinician, is to speak, as if I were your doctor. And I've had lots of conversations with patients I didn't know and have answered millions of questions on Facebook, and from people who had legitimate questions, not conspiracy theories. They were just confused because there's so much junk out there, and they just wanted to hear a doctor that they trusted. And, I've been honored that there've been folks that have used me in that situation. But the most important thing I tell people is talk to your doctor. And if you don't have one, let's get you one.
Yeah. I mean, I would much rather people be enticed to go get the vaccine by talking to their doctor than watching a loved one pass away because they
didn't. Yes, absolutely. And, and probably in my experience, of course, the further the epidemic we go, the harder it is to get people. They're getting more and more hardened to it. But we had a lot of folks that were just in the middle. They just didn't know what to do, and they hadn't seen me in 6 months, and they just need to have a conversation. And probably 40% of those got vaccinated before the tsunami. And now we have a large number of fence sitters who have seen enough that they're coming on to get the vaccine. We tripled our numbers last week, thank goodness. But we still have some folks that they're just not going to do it. And the only thing that I've seen changing their mind is when somebody that they truly know and love gets hit hard by it. And that's not what we want. Marcia, we're going to be immune from this thing one way or another. It's either going to be from vaccination or it's going to be natural immunity, but don't forget that number, 2.2%. So every time we report cases, multiply it by 2.2%, and that's the number of deaths that you're going to see in 2 weeks. And we don't need to have people dying so we get immune.
Right. Right. And that's the thing. A lot of people say, well, it's only 2%. Say somebody actually said to you only 2%. We'll multiply that by 340 million Americans. And suddenly that number is pretty frightening.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And the damage it does, like you like I said, you touched on it, the long-term COVID, the damage down the road. We're not even talking about that. But I mean, the damage to the healthcare system, which in Mississippi, as you know firsthand, was pretty fragile to begin with, to catch this kind of blow. Where do you think we're going to be in about 6 months? I mean, because this thing will burn out at some point because it's going to go through us like wildfire.
It is.
It'll burn out, but there'll be another variant, and so forth. How do we protect the healthcare system? Or right now, we're just trying to survive.
Yeah, and we were on a conference call yesterday with medical leaders around the state. And every Friday we have a call with the hospital CEOs and chief medical officers and get it, hear their voices, not just look at the pages. Yeah. And yesterday it was everybody's, we can't do anymore. I don't know, they're already doing more than they thought they ever could.
Yeah.
Because we're way past where we were in January. We've blown right past those numbers. Yeah. But hospitals really can only go so far, and they're truly getting to the breaking point. And we're telling them, man, you got to prepare for 2 more weeks of 200 admissions a day.
Yeah,
it's statewide. That's what we were looking at for 2 to 3 more weeks, and so they're in survival mode right now. Dr. Dobbs and Dr. Byers are convinced this will be our last one because it's blowing through our population. It's just going to go through everyone who has no immunity before 6 weeks is up. And then that probably will put the fire out, kind of like a wildfire going through. It's just not the way to do it, though.
No, it's not, because like I said, I would rather have, be achy from a shot than I would to have face. And I'm 53. So, I mean, I'm definitely in that sweet spot of somebody that could end up being very sick. I got mine, I guess, in April. I was trying to think back when I got it. Eventually, I guess I'll need a booster, and I'm sure that they'll do that. Do you think this is going to be like the flu shot where we have to go every year and get a COVID shot? Or do you think?
Yeah, probably, but I'll be honest with you, we know so much more than we knew 18 months ago, but we still are learning tons, because this thing is just, we've never seen anything like it. It's doing what it wants to do, and it's not behaving like the flu. It is nothing like the flu.
Right.
I've not seen any other virus behave this way, and we keep anticipating what it's going to do, and then it throws us a curveball. But we're thinking that it eventually will fade into the background like flu does in its off season. It'll still be there, but it won't be active, and then periodically it'll jump back out for those that don't have enough immunity. Probably those of us in higher risk categories will need to get boosted every year, and the younger, healthier people will have enough immunity that they can, fend it off like most people do with the flu. But, right now we're in a pandemic. Yeah. And that's why it's this, it's not a government conspiracy to try to get everybody vaccinated. We're trying to put the fire out. Once the fire is out, then we think it will behave more normally, like a virus should behave. But I don't want anybody quoting me right now, because I just don't know.
Well, you've got 6, 7 coronaviruses that affect people. Most of them are the common cold. You got SARS-1 and you got MERS, right? And then this SARS-2. And, you know, I mean, MERS will kill 30% of the people. I think I've got that off the top of my head. But a virus to kill that high of a percentage isn't going to be a very efficient virus, obviously, because it wants to reproduce. And if it's killing its host, it's not going to do it. Do you foresee this thing maybe evolving into being something a little more benign, like more like a common cold down the road?
We just haven't seen this thing up close and personal. I would love to think that. I don't right now.
Okay.
It certainly could. Certainly
Yeah.
could. I think it's probably going to be more like flu.
Yeah.
That, you know, and remember, on a good year, we lose 35,000 people to flu every year. And I think we'll get back down to those type numbers. But if we're losing 35,000 a year to flu and then another 35 to COVID, good grief.
Well, you know, you and I were both not alive in 1918. You know, I mean, maybe if you put us together, we would have been alive. Our ages together. My grandmother was. She remembers how incredibly terrifying it was on that. And she said she remembered the third wave, and everybody was getting really sick, and they were stacking people outside the funeral home, and it was bad. It went away.
It just went away. It just stopped.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I mean,
and we think that's what's going to happen here, and we think by the time this fourth wave is over that we'll have enough immunity that it'll, just praying that it will go away.
But for now, get the shot. It's free. It's easy. It's, you know, safe.
It's safe.
It's safe. And, you know, I think I heard that the FDA may approve Pfizer by Labor Day. So
yeah, or maybe even sooner. We keep being told that it's imminent. And all the data continues to look good. Just because the FDA hadn't approved it, the data is all there to review. They just have to dot their I's and cross their T's before they get full approval, and they're almost there. And they're almost there to drop the age down because the data is looking good there too.
You talked a lot about stress on medical staffs, and, you know, you hear the stories of the nurses who quit mid-shift or cry before they come into the hospital. Are there any plans that you've heard of or any thought of doing, having therapy available for medical staffs at once? Because you got to figure the PTSD, and y'all are tough. And I mean, like I said, I mean, you train hard, you see things, you deal with things that most people I don't think could handle, but this has been incredibly difficult just for the stress alone. Are there any plans or any thoughts on what to do for our medical staff down the road so we don't lose more of them just throwing up their hands and saying no mas?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of conversation about that. There are, online support groups for nurses and physicians, and the worst of times in terms of PTSD were the nurses who were taking care of the COVID patients a year ago when nothing was working.
Yeah.
It was, once you got on the ventilator, you had a 10% survival rate, and things are it's way better than that now. But now the PTSD is just, the wave won't stop. Just ambulance after ambulance is coming. And that's, you're exactly right. It's not just stressing the system, it's stressing the staff.
Yeah.
And they can only go so far. And that's why, a lot of people are just shaking their heads and I can't do this again.
Yeah. Yeah. One guy I talked to who works with patients in the ICU, he just said, this is avoidable. This should not have happened.
And that's making it harder to swallow. January, it was what it was, and we just fought the fight that we had. Now every patient that's going on the ventilator is like, man, you don't have to be doing this. We're doing something we should not be having to do.
Public health is, and I'll be very honest with you, and I'll be very open. My sister has worked for the CDC. She retired, and now she's working back with the CDC again. So, I've heard her side of things and stories. But public health has been politicized. It's a very difficult thing that some headwinds that y'all are facing a little bit. On the messaging, how do you get the message out there and try to be as honest and open as you possibly can? Because like I said, it's very tough when you're going up against something that's on Aunt Edna's Facebook page.
Right.
might face that. And I know, like I said, you obviously are very good on Twitter and Facebook now that I know who you are, and I do enjoy your tweets. But how do you get that message out and you fight against that kind of disinformation?
I had this conversation with my son last week because, anytime you post something that, the other side tends to pile on, and which I really don't even understand the psychology of. Why do you care if I'm trying to help people do what I think is the right thing? If you disagree, just don't do it.
Yeah.
But don't try to talk somebody else out of it. And I tell them, I said, for every one of those, there's 10 people who are thoughtfully looking at this information and making a good decision. And I know that because they'll thank me later. I get texts and tweets and Facebook messages all the time. Thank you, my husband finally took the vaccine, or thank you, my family's fully vaccinated. And and so it's just the conversation we've had among ourselves is, man, just don't give up. Keep running the race. This too shall pass. We're gonna keep working until we get through this, and we're gonna try to help save as many people that will let us. And by giving them the right information to make the right decisions for them and their families, and just as a physician that before March, I was absolutely just full-time private practice. I always appreciated the health department, never had a clue what they did until COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, I mean, we couldn't have done anything without the leadership of Thomas Dobbs and Paul Byers to give us the science, and to keep us up to speed on the science. And that's all we cared about. We wanted to know what was the data, what was the best thing to do in this situation. And we held hands and moved through this forward together. And Dr. Dobbs will tell you they couldn't have done what they did without private clinicians. So it was the first beautiful partnership of public medicine and private medicine. And then when he recruited me to come work for him, I told him, well, only if I can keep seeing patients. And he said, okay. And so that's something we want to continue, is to keep public medicine and private medicine great partners as we move forward for the sake of Mississippi, and because Mississippi needs it.
I think it's really cool that you're still seeing patients, because I know that's it. That makes a big deal. And I'm like some of my friends that still see patients and so forth. They feel like that's their laboratory as they get.
I'm able to tell them all the time that this is what we're seeing in clinic. This is what we're seeing in the hospital. This is for real what's going on. And they're able to hear from me directly from the front line, and then I'm able to push out the best science to the front line.
Let's see. I'm trying to think. I think we've about covered everything I was thinking about. But like you said, you mentioned we're going to have 2 more weeks of being crushed. Do you have models that are showing? I mean, do y'all use models that kind of show you what the
we're just looking at the slope of the curve right now, which is almost linear straight up.
Yeah.
And so, when you add 1,000 new cases in one day, you can kind of model what to project. So right now, Dr. Dobbs thinks we've got maybe a month of really bad numbers ahead of us. But then even coming down the backside of this thing, we think we'll come off fast because it's burning so quickly, but it's still going to be bad numbers coming down again until we get low. So we're, right now we're guessing 4 to 6 weeks, which, telling the ICU intensivist, you got another 4 weeks of this, man.
Yeah. Hang on to the cliff
hold on, brother.
Yeah.
Don't let go. But God bless them. And I've got friends friends around the state that's what they're doing. I listen to their stories and I just thank God for them.
The timing on this could not have been more cruel. But number one, I think everybody got that little taste of freedom from the vaccines. It was like 6 weeks of, we can go to restaurants. We don't have to worry about this. We can go be in crowds. Yeah, we can go to a concert and so forth. And then this thing hits right as kids are going back to school too.
Yep.
It's just it could not have picked a worse time to show up.
Yeah, we were so nervous last year, and the school systems rallied. And
hey, thank you for watching this episode of Mississippi Stories. Make sure to subscribe to the Mississippi Today YouTube channel and click the bell to be notified every time a new video uploads.
We just decided, no, we don't need all that. It worked last year, but we don't need it this year. And half our school districts tried to go back with nothing. So, at the worst time with with Delta on the rise.
Yeah. How do we combat that? I mean, because obviously there's the pandemic fatigue, and I don't think COVID really cares whether we're tired about it or not, but it's still going to hit us. But how do we? Yeah.
My other saying, Marshall, is COVID don't vote either.
Yeah, that's true.
It don't vote. It don't care. But it's pretty much going to take care of itself. Just like Lamar County, they had to shut down and go virtual. It's just going to happen across the state. Maybe some of the smaller districts will get by.
Yeah.
But all these large districts, there's no way around it. You can't keep chickenpox out of the school pre-vaccination days. And so it's going to be there, and it's going to spread through. And the vaccinated kids will have an easier time. They won't have to quarantine. And the vaccinated teachers will have a much easier time, but all the unvaccinated kids, so those under 12, it's just going to be a merry-go-round of in and out until it calms down. So it's going to take care of itself.
Yeah. How long do you think it'll be till they approve for younger kids under 12? And do you think anybody will get their kids vaccinated? Because there's, like I said, there's, it's going to make my kids sterile or whatever which it doesn't. By the way.
Which it doesn't. No, I tell folks, look, don't use it for contraception. It won't work. It just won't work for that.
Yeah.
I've got folks that are just standing by asking me all the time, how much longer, especially I have them with 11-year-olds who are going back to school. Yeah. And they're just right there. And it's, we're just hoping it's going to drop down so they can get their kids vaccinated. I'm going to tell you, I wish it would go down to 3-year-olds so my oldest grandson could get vaccinated.
Yeah.
It's just the kids are a natural reservoir, and it's just transmitting through. There's no way if they're in daycare and school, it's just that's what viruses do until it goes through the whole population. But again, a small percentage of kids don't do well with this thing. Thankfully, the majority do, but there's a small percentage, and those kids, that small percentage is important. We lost 2 more pregnant women last week, unvaccinated. So I think that gets us to like 7. We got 7 kids that are going to be growing up without their mama because of COVID. That we had to take the babies while the mother's dying.
Yeah.
This horrible stuff.
Yeah.
Stuff that regular folks don't need to know, but they have to know.
Right.
They have to know it to make good decisions.
Definitely on that. Like I said, I hope it would be kind of fun to fire up the DeLorean and go 20 years into the future and see what the research says about this virus and so forth. But
yeah.
I mean, what you were talking about, just what we've learned, people's like, well, Dr. Fauci said don't use masks back in last January, or, back in 2020. Well, yeah, that was because we had a shortage of masks.
Yeah, a shortage, right.
We since learned, this is basically an aerosol. It's not, because I remember wiping down my fruit,
right.
When it come in from the store, it's just,
right.
This whole thing has changed so much in the last year and a half and so forth. But what I found was fascinating, you're mentioning monoclonal antibodies, which is, God, talk about a godsend. That's at least the first real antiviral that, I guess is that an antiviral that y'all have had to be able to work on it. But even simple stuff like flipping people over onto their stomach.
Right. Had to figure that out.
And steroids. I mean, y'all have learned,
right.
Y'all learn these little tricks. I mean, that has helped the survival rate quite a bit.
I remember the first time I heard about ventilating in the prone position and just the whole process of flipping a patient, I just started shaking my head and said, man, we've never had to do that. I mean, that was like rare to ventilate in the prone position. And then it became standard of care for COVID.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Dan, is there anything I hadn't touched? I mean, obviously we've kind of covered the pretty much.
Man, if it is, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you've had a long day anyway, and I appreciate you taking the time. And Lord knows, I know, and just pass along to all the folks at the Department of Health. Say thanks, because I know it's been a lot of long days and a lot of long weekends, and right now it's getting even longer. And I appreciate all y'all do.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And, thank you for just preaching the right message and speaking the truth. That's what we need. I tell you, I want to read John Barry's book about this epidemic. That's
no kidding. It's amazing how that book literally pushed George Bush into creating all the reserves and doing all the planning and everything for that, because I know I read that book and I just totally got fascinated with it. My grandmother was still alive and I started asking her questions about it and everything else. It's like, but there are no memorials to that, to all the people that died from that. It was almost like when that got over with, they didn't want to talk about it anymore. And I have a feeling that we're going to be that way too.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, we're going to be exhausted. But I appreciate you taking time to talk to me about it today.
My pleasure. Glad to help you anytime. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
Okay, buddy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thank you for watching this episode of Mississippi Stories. Make sure to subscribe to the Mississippi Today YouTube channel and click the bell to be notified every time a new video uploads.